Once more, please give rise to the mind of bodhicitta, the thought, I will establish all other beings in perfect enlightenment. And in order to do this, I will now listen to this profound teaching and put it into practice. The teaching that we're looking at is Kheparapaktu, the praise of the superior qualities of the Buddha. We have covered the first 22 verses of this text, and the text in total contains 76 verses, so we have many more verses to get through. Yesterday we began, though, by speaking more generally about the differences between Buddhists and non-Buddhists, so the difference between the view, meditation, and conduct of Buddhists and non-Buddhists. And then more specifically we looked at the fivefold difference as presented by Longchenpa in his wish-fulfilling treasury. The difference between Buddhists and non-Buddhists in terms of their object of refuge, their view, their meditation, their conduct, and also the result that their practice leads to. So we outlined the difference between Buddhists and non-Buddhists in a general but also kind of detailed way using this framework. So if we have a good understanding of the main central points we discussed yesterday, these crucial differences between Buddhists and non-Buddhists in terms of their view, their meditation, their conduct, and so on, then as we proceed to look at the remaining verses of this text, well, everything will be quite clear to us. With that basic fundamental understanding, then all of the differences outlined in the following verses will be quite clear and easy to understand. As I've said before, if we explain in any kind of detail each of these verses, well, we could then end up speaking for several hours actually about each verse, because a lot of them reference stories that are very long and in some cases convoluted and really do justify several hours of explanation. It would take that long to just tell those stories that are the background for the various verses. We don't have that much time, so I won't go into that kind of detail, but know that such detail can be found in commentaries on this text, like the commentary by Sherab Gocha, as well as other authors. So I'm going to move quite quickly and only speak briefly about these stories. Some of them I'll go into in more detail, but others I'll have to kind of skip over. Please don't think, oh, Rinpoche didn't explain the stories. We just don't have time to go through each and every story, but know that if you do want to find that detail can be found in the relative commentaries. So let's continue where we left off yesterday with verse 23. Bayana, Vyasa, and others have said what has already been said, whereas being self-realized, your teaching is unique. So, Dvipayana, excuse my bad pronunciation, or Vyasa, is the name of one very significant non-Buddhist teacher, and he composed the Mahabharata, which is the greatest and longest epic in the Hindu or Vedic tradition. Who is included in others, when it says and others here? Well, we could include Tulsidas, for instance, who wrote the Ramana, another great epic. Tulsidas was a great celebrated Indian poet. So these authors have said what has already been said, meaning their stories, whether it be the Mahabharata, an epic so long and detailed, it can literally take months to tell this story or to enact this story, and Ramana and so on. They are merely repetitions of what has already been said, so they might be more elaborate kind of renditions of an existing story. The meaning might be ornamented, expanded upon, and so on, or kind of freshly retold, but it is still a retelling, it is a repetition. It is not something new or unique. It's not something that these authors have researched themselves, discovered anew for themselves, and have then set forth. They are simply retelling an existing story. In contrast, Buddhist teachings are unique because they are self-realized. So what are Buddhist teachings? Well, they can be condensed into the three rather they are contained in the 3 Pitakas. The Pitakas or baskets of the sutra teachings, Abhidhamma and Vinaya. What do these 3 Pitakas teach? What is their subject matter? Well, it is the 3 trainings, so we could say the 4 truths. The 4 truths of suffering, the origin of suffering, cessation, and the path. So how are these different from the compositions of Vyasa and so on? Well, they're different because they are unique, they are unprecedented. The 4 Noble Truths had never been spoken of and never been heard of before Buddha himself taught them. And how did he come up with this teaching of the 4 truths? Well, through his own experience. These 4 truths are truths that he touched upon himself through his own practice, his own introspection, his own practical experience, in short, which led him to realization of the truth and so on. It's from Buddha's personal experience that the 4 Noble Truths and his other teachings arise. This is spoken of in Semanandra, the commentary on valid cognition. So this being the case, Buddha's teachings are unique. They do not teach mere shamatha. They are not just ordinary oral compositions that are sort of a retelling of what has already been said, but rather they are self-realized. So again, this means that in the case of the 4 Noble Truths, these are truths, principles that Buddha discovered for himself through his own experience, his own processes. First of all, he discovered that he realized that all phenomena are suffering, the nature of suffering, the cause of this, and there are so many different types of suffering, aspects of suffering Buddha enumerated. The origin of this suffering is karma and the afflictions. This suffering can be brought to a halt. It is possible to reach a state of cessation. That's the 3rd Noble Truth. When karma and afflictions are brought to a halt, then suffering too ceases. And this state of cessation doesn't come about without cause and condition. Rather, it comes about through following the path. And so then we have the fourth of the 4 Noble Truths, the path. And each of these can be presented in more detail with their 4 factors and so on and so forth. So in short, this is another difference between the teachings of Buddha and the teachings of others. Buddha's teachings are unique and come from his personal experience, unlike the teachings of others, which are simply retellings of what has already been said. Verse 24 reads, Tirthakas teach the Vedas exclusively and in secret, whereas you have proclaimed and taught the teaching with a lion's roar. So the Tirthakas refers to the extremist teachers, outsider teachers, and includes also their deities, Vishnu, Brahma, Shiva, and so on and so forth. They teach the Vedas. The Vedas, the 4 Vedas, are the fundamental scripture of these non-Buddhist, let's say, Hindu traditions. Just as when it comes to the tradition of Buddha, the Buddha Dharma, the central scriptures are the 3 Pitakas, right? And we could say, so the central scriptures are the 3 Pitakas, and the central subject matter are the 3 trainings, or we could say the fundamental tenets of Buddha's teachings are the 4 seals that are the hallmark of the Buddhist view. But the point here is that just as the 3 Pitakas are the central or fundamental Buddhist scriptures, the 4 Vedas are the fundamental non-Buddhist, or let's say Hindu scriptures. And these 4 Vedas are taught secretly and exclusively. Of course, this is describing how things were done in the past, right? In the past, when this text was written. These teachings of the Vedas were only taught to Brahmins, meaning those who were born as Brahmins, those of the Brahmin class. And also they were only taught in oral form. They were not permitted to be written down. Again, this is how things were done in the past. These days things are quite different. You can go into any bookshop. No matter who you are, you can buy a written copy of the Vedas, but this is not how things were for a long time, right? So back then, it was only the Brahmin class who had access to the teachings of the Vedas. Those of the royal caste, the merchant class, or the lower castes, the outcasts, were not allowed to access the Vedas. And so these teachings were kept secret. They were taught exclusively only to the elite. Generally speaking, there are two types of secrecy. So the first type of secrecy is that something is kept secret because of its special qualities. Something is so precious and valuable that for that reason it is safeguarded with secrecy. Then there's another type of secrecy, which is actually a kind of hiding something away, concealing something in order to keep its faults, its foibles from view, right? So which type of secrecy this secrecy of the Vedas was, I don't know, but anyway. There was also the notion, or perhaps there is also the notion, that in order to attain enlightenment, then one must be born as a Brahmin. So this is also part of their religious beliefs. It's not possible to attain enlightenment or accomplishment as an ordinary person, basically as anyone who is not a Brahmin. Someone who is of lower caste or a more common caste, they do not have the potential for enlightenment. Only those born as Brahmins have the potential for enlightenment. They say being a Brahmin is like the doorway to a house. It is the entryway to enlightenment. So such are the beliefs and the practices of these non-Buddhists. In contrast, you, Buddha, have proclaimed and taught the teaching with a lion's roar. Buddha taught his teaching of the Four Noble Truths and so on, far and wide, openly, to anyone who wanted to listen in places like Lankavatara and so on and so forth. Buddha taught not just hundreds but thousands of people. He taught people of all classes, so not just Brahmins, but people of any and all caste and class. He taught women, he taught men. He did not discriminate when it came to the audience of his teachings. Furthermore, Buddha's teachings are free of contradictions. They are established with logic. And so there is no need, therefore, to keep these teachings secret, because they are perfectly valid. And again, Buddha did not discriminate when giving teachings. He taught openly and widely to anyone who wanted to listen. Verse 25. As for Bharadvaja, he fell in love at the sight of Vasanti, in spite of having seen the suchness, whereas even your disciples were not attached to females. So Bharadvaja, he was the leader or founder of one of the 5 sophist schools, or we could say the 5 Tarka schools. In short, the 5 primary non-Buddhist schools in Tibet. They include the Jains, the Charvakas, the Samkhyas, and so on. And the Samkhyas actually are the supreme of all these non-Buddhist schools, and indeed it is the Samkhyas to whom most of kind of the refutations and debate that we find in Buddhist scriptures like Zemanamja, the commentary on valid cognition. It's the Samkhya school to which most of the debates and refutations are directed, because that school is really quite advanced and sophisticated. In any case, Bharadvaja was a main teacher of one of these schools, and what is the story mentioned here, that he fell in love and so on, this actually is according to his own followers' account. It's not that the Buddhists are disparaging, this is not a kind of Buddhist version of the story in order to criticize him. This is their own account. According to their own account, this teacher had seen suchness, meaning he had gained direct realization of reality, had seen the truth, but still he was vulnerable to falling in love. So it's said that what happened is that Bharadvaja became so developed spiritually, he gained realization, and this triggered a lot of jealousy in other gods. And so they sent a beautiful goddess called Chidanma to tempt him, and indeed he was tempted. He fell in love with her, he ended up getting married, getting married and so on. And in the process, he let his practice slip, he set his practice aside and just became totally immersed in his love and passion for his spouse. So in contrast, you, Buddha, of course, Buddha himself left his wife and his consorts, abandoned his palace and renounced worldly life. But not only Buddha, even his disciples. For instance, his supreme disciples Shariputra and Modgalyana, who was the most supremely capable in terms of miracles, they too left behind their families, their spouses, renounced worldly life, and set out on the path to liberation. Now, verse 26. Uluka has taught to be generous to superiors rather than to the poor and downtrodden, whereas, O Lord, you have, out of compassion, taught to be generous even to dogs. So here, this verse is referencing yet another non-Buddhist school, the school founded by Uluka, which Ulu actually means an owl. So an owl features in the history of this school. Anyway, the followers of this school, they believe that there are 6 substantially existent phenomena. So these 6 substantially existent phenomena are material substances, qualities, karma, generalities, specifics, and I think the 6th one is spiritual discipline. In any case, they believe in 6 substantial phenomena, and the story of their origins is quite interesting. It involves, sorry, I didn't catch all the details. Rinpoche just told the story briefly. Someone encounter with a Shiva Linga, I think a practitioner, perhaps was sitting by a Shiva Linga, and then an owl kind of appeared perched on the linga, and the practitioner put several questions to the owl, and said, is this substantially existent, is that substantially existent? And when he mentioned these 6 things, material substance and so on, the owl sort of nodded, and so that practitioner took those 6 things to be confirmed by the owl to be substantially existent, and that became their philosophy or belief. So those who follow this school, they believe they believe that one should practice generosity to superiors, and here this is specifically referring to Brahmins, those of the Brahmin caste. They believe that there is greater merit and benefit in practicing generosity to Brahmins, those of superior caste, rather to those who are actually in need, the poor, the downtrodden, the vulnerable. So they believe if you give to a Brahmin, you will, let's say, accumulate 100, let's say, watts of merit. But if you give to an ordinary person, well, you'll accumulate just 1 kind of watt of merit. Sorry, watt is just I'm just adding that in here for the sake of communication. And if you give to animals, for instance, then you're accumulating even less merit. And actually, this belief is still followed and still practiced in India. If you actually look at to whom people practice generosity, well, it's to the Brahmins, no matter what kind of qualities they have or don't have, no matter, regardless of whether they have any qualities, whether they're actually spiritual practitioners, regardless of whether they're educated or not. People believe that just by virtue of their caste, their caste, that they are somehow superior objects of generosity, and that giving gifts to them will create more merit. In recent years, one of the laborers at our monastery was a Brahmin, of Brahmin caste, and that made me kind of reflect on this belief, this belief in the superiority of caste. And I thought it's actually very sad, to hold on to this belief. It doesn't take into account any actual qualities, education, other qualities and virtues, or even, things like material wealth, appearance, and so on. Just this belief, persistent belief in the superiority of a certain caste or class. Anyway, in contrast to this, O Lord, you, Buddha Shakyamuni, have taught that out of compassion one should be generous even to dogs. So in the Buddha's teachings, the practice of generosity is completely different. It's believed that the lower in the sense of the more vulnerable, the more disadvantaged one's object of generosity, then the greater the benefit, the greater the merit, the greater the virtue accumulated, because of that being's need, right? So, for instance, rather than giving to people of high class, if you give to those who are in society who are vulnerable, who are disadvantaged, if you give to animals, right, and from among animals to those who are suffering, who are hungry, who are sick, or what have you, and also give to hungry ghosts, to hell beings even, through dedication, this is believed to generate more merit than giving to someone in a high position who's already advantaged, right? Of course, when it comes to offering, then yes, Buddhist understanding is that the higher your object of offering, then the greater the merit. But offering is slightly different from generosity, right? So when it comes to making offerings, then yes, the higher your object of offering, then the more virtue accumulated. For instance, if you offer to an ordained monastic, that's going to accumulate more merit than offering to an ordinary practitioner, or offering to, say, a ngakpa, a tantrika, or offering to the noble sangha, so realized beings, is going to create even more merit. If you offer to a noble bodhisattva, that will create even more merit, and compared to offering to a noble bodhisattva, to offer to an actual Buddha, that will create even more merit, so that there is this kind of hierarchy of virtue when it comes to offering. But when it comes to generosity, as our text reads, Buddha taught us to be generous even to dogs. So we can say that this highlights a difference between Buddhists and non-Buddhists in terms of the view, or we could say in terms of conduct. Verse 27. Digambara asserts the disentanglement of knots through the physical austerities, whereas you assert the disentanglement of knots through the mental austerities. So this verse is referring to the approach of the Jains. Digambara is one of the a central figure in the Jain tradition. The Jainists believe that the body is the root of all suffering, and that therefore, if one causes the body suffering, if one practices physical austerities, that will purify suffering, that will purify misdeeds, purify sins, obscurations, and so on. And as a result, because they hold this belief, then they engage in extreme physical austerities. For instance, in the middle of the height of summer, they will do what they call relying on the 5 fires, meaning they sit themselves in the midst of 4 blazing fires, one in front, one behind, one to their right, one to their left, and then the fifth fire is the sun blazing overhead. And they scorch their body in this way, believing that physical suffering is going to purify their misdeeds, obscurations, non-virtues, and so on. They also practice self-flagellation, whipping themselves, beating themselves, harming their body, even causing their body to bleed and so on, with the same belief that this is all going to purify their obscurations, their misdeeds. The knots here, when it says disentanglement of knots is referring to the afflictions of attachment, aversion, and ignorance. So they believe that through physical austerities, the mental knots, the afflictions can be purified. In contrast, you, Buddha, assert the disentanglement of knots, meaning the afflictions of attachment, aversion, and ignorance, to occur through mental austerities. So the complete opposite approach. Buddha taught that it is by purifying the mind, focusing on the mind and purifying the mind, that all other sufferings, physical included, are purified and discarded. Verse 28. Tartikas assert the independence of all phenomena, whereas, O sovereign, you have asserted the non-existence of independent phenomena. So Tarkika is a Sanskrit of Dogewa in Tibetan, which often we translate as skeptic. That word probably refers to non-Buddhist extremists, as translated here. And that's indeed the meaning it holds here. So Tarkikas, or we could say skeptics, refers to non-Buddhist extremists. That said, just a note on the term, sometimes this same term in Tibetan is used to refer to Buddhist scholars who are skeptical or dry intellectuals. But in this context, it certainly refers to the non-Buddhist extremists. And these non-Buddhist extremists, they assert the independence of all phenomena. There are many kind of different shades of this belief, but all non-Buddhist extremists assert the independence, or we could say the permanence, and the reality of all phenomena. They assert, say, the independence of time, of direction, of an ineffable self, and so on, of prakriti and purusha, and so on and so forth. This principal factor the source of all things, or a self with 5 qualities, and so on. So the various schools have slightly different beliefs, but they assert the permanence of these phenomena, the independence of these phenomena, phenomena that are permanent, independent, and self-sufficient. In short, the phenomena that do not need to rely on other factors. In contrast, you, O sovereign. So sovereign here, the Tibetan literally reads sovereign of words, or sovereign of speech. And this is indeed referring to Buddha Shakyamuni. But the same term, sovereign of speech, is also often used as an epithet or a name for deities like Saraswati or Manjushri, who have a particular association with speech, with expression. But here, sovereign of speech refers specifically to Buddha Shakyamuni. So you've explained that the non-existence of independent phenomena. Buddha explained how all phenomena are interdependent. All phenomena are the result of the coming together of causes and conditions. There is not a single thing that does not rely on causes and conditions. So rather than asserting things to be independent, Buddha showed things to be interdependent, right? As the Buddha said, and as Nagarjuna stated in his root stanzas of the Middle Way, there is not a single thing that is not interdependent. There is not a single thing that is... because there is not a single thing that is not interdependent, therefore there is not a single thing that is not empty. So interdependence and emptiness are actually 2 sides of the same coin. So this, the fact that the non-Buddhist extremists assert the independence of phenomena, whereas Buddha asserted the non-existence of such phenomena and instead showed things to be interdependent. This is a difference between Buddhists and non-Buddhists in terms of their view. Verse 29. It has been said that Shuka, piercing through the sun, has gone to the liberation, whereas you have attained liberation, not having gone elsewhere. So, Shuka is said to be Shuka is the daughter of a Brahmin called Gyepa, Drumse Gyepa, and so it's said that Shuka, piercing through the sun, has gone to liberation. Certain non-Buddhist schools believe that the sun is the location of liberation, a city of liberation, or we could say a pure realm or heaven. So they believe that liberation is actually a place, a physical location, a material thing, and that in order to get there, in order to get to the sun, one needs to pierce through the sky. And Shuka achieved this. She pierced through the sky, pierced through the sun, and thereby attained liberation. In contrast, you refers to Buddha Shakyamuni, you've attained liberation not having gone elsewhere, not having gone anywhere, just right here and now you attained liberation. So just as the Buddhist teachings explain, liberation is a state of being, we can say. When our perception is impure and confused, then we are in samsara. When our perception is purified, then that itself is the pure realm. As many prayers state, when one's own perception is pure, that is Sukhavati. When one is purified, one's perception, one arrives in Sukhavati. So liberation or not depends simply on whether our own perception is purified or not, because it is because external phenomena are a reflection, or external appearances are a reflection of our own state of mind, right? So liberation, it's understood, is not an external place or entity, but rather a reflection of our personal perception. Liberation is a state, purified state of mind. So again, we have another difference between Buddhist teachings and that of non-Buddhist highlighted here. There's of course so much more to say actually about this point, as with every point, but I'll just leave it. I'll leave it at that. Verse 30. Shuka has gained liberation through one path and has generated another path for his disciples. So I'm not entirely sure about the names. So that we have Drumse Gyepa, which could be translated as Brahmin's Shuka, and then we have his daughter, who was referenced in the previous verse, But here it seems the name Shuka is referring to the father. In any case, sorry, that's just a note from me as the translator. But anyway, the point is, regardless of the issue with the names, the previous verse we were talking about this Brahman's daughter who attained liberation by piercing through the sun, and here we're talking about the father and also the daughter. So the father is being called Shuka. Shuka has gained liberation through one path. So he believed, the father believed that the body is the nature of suffering, and in order to attain liberation, one needs to cast aside the body. And it's by casting aside the body that liberation is attained. In contrast, though, his daughter attained liberation without abandoning her body. She actually traveled with her body through the sky, pierced the sun, and in the sun attained liberation. So you have the teacher attaining liberation in one way, and then his disciples, like his daughter, attaining liberation in another, or the teacher actually teaching a different path to liberation. So this is contradictory, right? It is inconsistent and contradictory. In contrast, you, Buddha, have taught just one and the same path for yourself and also your disciples. So, as the text says, the path through which you've gone is the same one followed by your disciples, right? It's not that Buddha followed one path to liberation and then taught his disciples another. The path that, any path that is pointed out should lead consistently to the same place, right? Like if, we all take, say, a certain road, supposedly leading to a certain place, that road should take us all to the same place, right? It shouldn't be that some of us on that road end up in one place and another, and some others in another. So Buddha attained liberation in a certain way, and the path he then taught that same route to his disciples, and his disciples like Shariputra and so on indeed attained the same state of liberation through that same path. Verse 31. Vishnu has owned 60,000 consorts, whereas, O transcendental master teacher, you do not possess any. So Vishnu is said to have had 60,000 consorts. Indeed, in the past in India, it was believed that the more wives or consorts one had, whether it be if someone is a king or a leader or what have you, having many wives or consorts was a sign of power, a sign of status, and maybe I think it probably the same belief held in traditional China. So, you read about leaders and so on in the past who are kind of praised as having 500 consorts, or this king or this leader who had 20 or 30 wives and so on and so forth. This was seen as a good quality, right? And as I said, a sign of status, power, accomplishment. So Vishnu had 60,000 consorts. This then was regarded as a great quality, something quite extraordinary. In contrast, O transcendental master teacher, so Buddha Shakyamuni, you do not possess any. Buddha Shakyamuni left behind all of his consorts. He had 500 consorts in total when he was a prince in the royal palace, Sortsema, Jamsema and so on, 500 beautiful women, but he left all of them behind. Buddha saw that clinging to the self, or we could say perception of self, is the root of suffering and the root of samsara. So to maintain the perception of a self and possessions of self, so in short, me and mine, is the root of suffering, only perpetuates suffering. To think this is my country, my wife, my consort, my family, my house, my possessions and so on, is a source of suffering. And recognizing this, Buddha then abandoned and let go of his consorts. As it says here, Buddha did not possess any consorts, whereas in contrast, Vishnu had 60,000, and his followers believe that to be a wonderful thing. So this is again another contrast, another difference between the Buddhists and non-Buddhists, a difference in terms of conduct.
Verse 32. By the beautiful lady of Kashi, Vyasa was totally roused, whereas you, even in the palace, are not overpowered by malignant destruction. So Vyasa was a sage, an accomplished sage in ancient India, and the beautiful lady of Kashi was a courtesan, a popular courtesan with all of the nobility and so on of the time, a dancer, a famous dancer as well. So Vyasa, this sage, he took himself off to the mountains, and for many years he practiced very intensely in the mountains. He gained a degree of accomplishment. But after some time, after many years had passed, he kind of grew tired of staying in the mountains. And so he came down to the town, and in the town he encountered this beautiful Kashi, and was totally aroused by her, and ended up having an affair with her, or basically, kind of, you could say, settling down, getting married to her. So, for all the time he'd been in the mountain, he'd observed chastity, and been focused on his spiritual practice. But then, leaving the forest, falling under the being beguiled by the beautiful lady Kashi, he put his practice aside and ended up settling down with his woman. In contrast, you, Buddha Shakyamuni, even in the palace, are not overpowered by malignant destruction. So malignant destruction here is describing the afflictions of attachment, the disturbing emotion of desire. Even in the palace where you had 500 courtesans, 500 beautiful women, you were not tempted. You were not tempted, and you ended up giving them up, leaving the palace and taking yourself off alone to the mountains. So here we have a difference between Buddha and non-Buddhist teachers in terms of conduct. Verse 33. Vyasa, overpowered by desire and unstable mind, was kicked by the lady of Kashi, whereas you, even staying at home, were undisturbed and firm. So this is referring to quite an entertaining story. It'll take a while to tell though, so I'm not sure, should I tell it or should I not? Because we have very little time. Maybe I'll tell it just briefly, and then if necessary I'll just go very quickly through some of the later verses, because this is quite a nice story, or entertaining story at least. So, as we know, the sage Vyasa, he was a very accomplished and respected sage. He'd spent many years practicing in the forest, training in samadhi. But then he'd come out of the forest, and his emotions had got the better of him. He'd fallen in love with this beautiful lady of Kashi, this courtesan, and settled down with her. So, in spite of his many years of meditation training, he forgot a lot of his practice, and a lot of the power of his samadhi waned when, as he spent time, more and more time, just as a kind of lay person, let's say, more and more time settled down with this courtesan. Because this is the thing with non-Buddhist meditation practice, non-Buddhist samadhi. They are merely types of shamatha. They do not involve vipassana, and as a result, they do not uproot the emotions completely. Shamatha alone can only suppress the emotions. It can only temporarily suppress them. It cannot completely uproot them. And so we see this in the case of Vyasa. When he left the forest and settled down, then slowly the emotions he'd suppressed through his previous practice rose up again, a bit like when you ferment grains of barley to make beer. Then over time the grains start to ferment, they start to kind of fizz, and a yeast starts to rise out of them, right? And so the same thing happened with Vyasa. The emotions, anger, attachment, desire, and all the rest began to arise. He began to fall under the sway of these emotions. They began to affect him, to take hold of him, and dictate his actions. For instance, something would trigger anger in him, and then he'd fall under the sway of that anger and ending up picking a fight. Or likewise, something would trigger his desire, and then that desire would dictate his actions. So here part of his story that's mentioned is the time when his courtesan wife, Kashi, kicked him in the head. This is quite an extraordinary thing to happen, that a courtesan would end up kicking a revered sage in the head. So how on earth did they get to this point? Well, it was like this. They were living in the area of Varanasi, and a war broke out in Varanasi. The king then announced an edict, said that every citizen must dig a hole in the ground. This was part of their war efforts. And so every person was ordered to dig 10 cubits deep, or maybe it was 10 cubits
and volume. In any case, quite a large, deep hole in the ground, including the courtesan Kashi. And courtesan Kashi, she's used to luxury, right? She's kind of high class lady, not used to having to work for herself, get her hands dirty. So she went running around trying to find someone to do her job for her, right? She couldn't find a single person free to do her labor. And so she got into a right huff and puff. And when Vyasa, the sage, saw this, he asked her, what's up? Why are you in such a foul mood? And she explained the situation. He said, there's no need to get so upset. Just give me a basket and a spade, and I'll go off and I'll dig your quota, of however many cubits you need to dig into the ground. And so then we had an extraordinary scene with a revered sage carrying a basket, this kind of baskets they traditionally use to, load like earth and so on into. It was like the traditional version of a wheelbarrow. So he's got this on his back and a spade in his hand, and he walks off to wherever it is that he needs to dig his hole to do his courtesan's work for her. But he's old, this sage, he's already quite old and not very strong physically, so he gives it his all, but he really doesn't get very far. The hours go by, the clock is ticking, and yet he's made hardly any progress. And together with this edict, the king has announced that if each person does not finish digging X amount of cubits by the end of the day, they will be charged, or they'll be punished in a certain way, or fined a certain amount. And so the clock is ticking, and Kashi, the courtesan, is suddenly very worried about getting fined, getting punished. Vyasa looks up into the sky, and he sees the sun is about to set. He also sees he is nowhere near fulfilling his task. And so what he does is he uses his samadhi, his previous powers of samadhi, to stop the sun moving. Now, modern scientific people might not believe this, but that's how the story goes. That's how it's told. He used his power of samadhi to halt the movement of the sun. And so the sun didn't set. Night did not come. The sun just remained where it was in the sky, and the day continued. And so Vyasa kept on digging. 2 days passed, but with the sun stationary in the sky. Still he hadn't managed to fulfill his task, because he just was not strong enough. And then everyone started to wonder, what on earth is going on? The sun is not moving, something is up. And then someone suggested that maybe it was the sage Vyasa, that maybe he had done this. And so the ministers went off to investigate the situation, and indeed they found Vyasa digging away. They asked him what he is doing. He said, I'm digging Kashi's quota. I'm doing it for her. And they said, but look, you've halted the movement of the sun. We need things to move on now. Just stop what you're doing. You can be relieved of your duty. No need for you to do this. No need for courtesan Kashi to do it. Just put your spade down. Please take your spell off the sun, and let's all move on. But the sage refused. He said, no, if I don't fulfill this quota, if I don't do this as I promised I would, then courtesan Kashi will be angry, she'll be enraged. I must fulfill my promise to her. So he would not listen to the ministers. They went back to the king, they reported what they'd found, and then the king said, all right, well then go to courtesan Kashi and tell her to tell him directly to stop. This is ridiculous. This has to stop. So when the ministers arrived at their house, at courtesan Kashi's house, she was very nervous, to have the ministers being sent to her by the king. And so she quickly sent off 2 servants to pass a message to Vyasa, to tell him to stop digging, and then it was all fine, and also to let the sun move on. But he would not listen. And so Kasi sent 2 more servants off to pass him the message, but still he wouldn't listen. Then courtesan Kashi, in her fury, she drove out to where he was herself. She drove out in a chariot, and she got down and approached Vyasa, this old sage, esteemed sage, with long locks of hair, covered in dust and sweat, holding a spade and digging away, trying to make this deep hole in the ground. Kashi told him, Kashi, the courtesan, said to him, "You just put your spade down. Stop digging. Why, I sent 2 servants, then 2 more servants, and telling you to stop. But here you are, you insist on continuing your task. I've told you to stop, and still he wouldn't listen. He was so determined to fulfill his promise to her. And she got so mad that she just flung her foot back and kicked him straight in the head. So this is quite extraordinary, right? You have an esteemed sage, someone who the king and nobility prostrate to, pay homage to, sitting here on the floor covered in dust and sweat and being kicked in the head, not slapped even, but kicked in the head by a courtesan, a woman he has fallen for. Honestly, this is what can happen if a lama, a practitioner, falls under the sway of under the sway of a woman, or the sway of basically romantic love, romantic attachments. Usually, if any of us got kicked in the head, our response would be anger, right? We would not be so pleased about being kicked in the head. But how did Vyasa respond? He responded with delight. He said, "Oh, my sweetheart Kashi, she loves me so much that she is kicking me in the head to stop me from working. Such a great gesture of love." So instead of responding with anger, he just responded with joy. So that is the story about the sage Vyasa, who ended up being kicked by the lady of Kashi. You, Buddha Shakyamuni, in contrast, you, even when you were staying at home in the palace, with so many beautiful women and consorts surrounding you, you remained undisturbed and firm. You didn't even, you were not moved one bit by desire. You didn't even give a desirous look to a single one of these women. Verse 34. Rama, for the sake of his consort, is said to have reached beyond the ocean, whereas you've gone into the forest, having abandoned the 80,000 ladies. So this is again, this verse again makes reference to a very long story, actually a story we found told in the Ramana, about Rama and his wife Sita, and how she was taken away, she was abducted and taken off to Sri Lanka. We won't go into all the details, it's a very long, convoluted story. In short, though, Sita was abducted, and Rama, her husband, in response, he waged a war. He waged a war and caused an enormous amount of destruction, killed many thousands of people, and also crossed the ocean during the process in his attempt to get her back. All of this was done out of desire and attachment to his reputation, because he was embarrassed about the consequences for his reputation, if he let someone steal away his wife, and also out of desire for his wife Sita. Of course, love for one's spouse is a good thing, but this was not genuine love. This was just desire, just plain lust, basically. And we can see this when we look at the story, at what actually happened, because later on, Rama, even when he got Sita back, he was then suspicious of her, jealous that she might have been sleeping with other people, and he actually attempted to burn her alive, saying, "If you were faithful to me, then the flames will not burn you, but if you were unfaithful, then may you be burnt alive." So this is not real love, right? This is just desire. So Rama did all of that under the sway of his desire, whereas you, Buddha Shakyamuni, you went into the forest, you abandoned the 80,000 ladies surrounding you. You, excuse me, left them completely alone. You took yourself off into solitude, applied yourself to practice, and you brought that practice to fruition. So another distinction between Buddha and non-Buddhist teachers in terms of conduct. Verse 35, Karna and Duryodhana and others were harmed by Vishnu, whereas, for the benefit of all sentient beings, you've sacrificed even your life. So again, this is a reference to some of the long and quite convoluted Hindu epics or Vedic epics. I'm afraid I didn't catch all the details that Rinpoche mentioned, but I think Karna and Duryodhana were two brothers, or in any case, they were two figures who Vishnu felt threatened by. He thought, if they continue to gain power, if they continue to grow up and gain power, they will be a threat to me. And out of his jealousy, then he killed them, in short. That was it. There are a few more details I'm afraid I didn't catch. In contrast, you, Buddha Shakyamuni, for the benefit of all sentient beings, have sacrificed even your life. Time and time again in his past lives, Buddha Shakyamuni has given up his own life for the benefit of others. For instance, the time when Buddha gave up, in the previous life, when Buddha gave up his life in order to feed a tigress and her cubs who were on the verge of starvation. The time when he was a king of a kingdom struck by famine, and he practiced nyungne, made a vow to sacrifice himself for the benefit of his subjects, and actually, I think it took his own life with the aspiration that he could be reborn as a fish, an enormous fish, or perhaps better we say a whale, whose flesh could sustain his subjects, and so on and so forth. There are so many stories like this, so many instances of Buddha giving his own life for the benefit of others, in contrast to teachers like Vishnu, who actually take others' lives and cause them harm in that way. Verse 36, Vishnu, through a stratagem, snatched the whole land by his 3 steps. So this is a reference to the story that one of the previous verses also referenced, right? And we told that story in brief, how there was a figure, I think a demigod, who was gaining, through the power of his generosity, was becoming incredibly powerful through the power of merit accumulated through his generosity. He was becoming very powerful, and he was on the verge of becoming sovereign of the entire 3 realms. And Vishnu saw this and felt very threatened. He thought, if I don't do something to obstruct this person's generosity, to prevent them from increasing their power through such extraordinary merit, they will become more powerful than me. And so he devised this cunning plan. He went before this person, made a request of them, and of course, because of their practice of generosity, they agreed to give him whatever he asked for. He asked for 1 step's worth of land. Then the person said, oh, we'll take 3. And then as soon as he'd been granted these 3 steps worth of land, he revealed himself, and with his powers then he traversed the entire 3 realms with a single step. And then he said, oh, where should I take the 2nd step? And this the person, this very generous being, said, oh, well, step onto my head. And with that, he lost all of his power and mastery. And so Vishnu remained the powerful being that he is. So this is what we're talking about here. And this story is told, it's actually a much more detailed story than that. It's told with great wonder and amazement. The followers of Vishnu believe this to be a wonderful, incredible thing, a virtuous and praiseworthy thing that Vishnu did. And this is not reflected that clearly in our translation. But this verse is also referring to the... it seems there's also a reference or connotation of the physical location of some of the holy wars waged in... some of the holy wars that are recounted in the Mahabharata, this epic poem or epic myth. And there is the belief in the Hindu tradition that if you can physically visit this place, this war battlefield, and you can bow down to it, touch the crown of your head to that blessed soil, and if you can die there, then your liberation is guaranteed. But actually, because, like I said, most of these Hindu stories are more kind of myths than actual historical accounts, we can't really identify an exact physical location with any certainty, physical place where this and that war in the past really took place. For instance, just as an example, recently there was a lot of claims by various Hindu followers that a certain area where a mosque was built was the birthplace of Rama, and so a lot of debate and so on went on back and forth. Eventually they got the right to destroy the mosque and to excavate the land saying that they had, sort of religious right to this land because it was Ram's birthplace. What did they find, though, when they excavated the land? They actually found just a lot of ancient Buddhist statues. No evidence of anything connected to Ram or the Hindu tradition. So this is often how it is with a lot of these Hindu stories or ancient events. They're more mythological than historical. In any case, in contrast to Vishnu and his deception, you, Buddha Shakyamuni, being definitely liberated, have given up the land just as mere grass. So, compared to that intense attachment to land, to territory, you, Buddha Shakyamuni, just gave up all your property. You gave up your inheritance as a mere grass, so lightly, so easily. We don't hold on to grass, right? So we could say Buddha Shakyamuni cast it all aside, just like you would toss away a piece of spit or a strand of grass. So the distinction being made here is in terms of attachment, how Buddha is free of attachment, where these non-Buddhist teachers are bound by attachment. Verse 37. Parashurama, by the arrows of killing, destroyed the king's clan. The fame he has gained is an infamy in your teaching. So there was a Brahmin called, Brahmin Dramenza, something like that, and he had a wife who was a very wonderful and praiseworthy woman. Her conduct was incredibly pure. Her conduct was so incredibly pure that when she went out to, say, pick flowers and so on, all the trees would bow down to her. The birds would naturally flock around her and so on, because of the strength and purity of her conduct. So purity of conduct, we mean like a degree of chastity, fidelity, and so on, right? Pure conduct in terms of desire. Excuse me, that sounds strange in English. Pure conduct in terms of the conduct of chastity. But after some time, a king arrived in the land. A king arrived threatening war. And she found herself very attracted to this king. She kind of fell in love with him. Nothing actually happened between them, but she did fall in love with him. And because she'd fallen under the sway of desire, mentally at least, then the trees no longer bowed down to her, the birds no longer flocked around, and so on. And when the Brahmin, her husband, heard about this change, well, he immediately presumed that she had been unfaithful. He suspected his wife, became very critical and also very angry. He called to him his son. His son was Parashurama, and his son was also his student. And he was incredibly obedient. He did whatever his father, who was also his teacher, said. And so he commanded his son to behead his mother. And the son, being so obedient, just went ahead and beheaded his mother. She hadn't actually she hadn't actually done anything. She had just fallen in love, developed a crush on this king. But the Brahmin had her beheaded. The father then was so pleased and proud of his son and his student. He said, you are the best of sons, the best of students. Now, tell me what you wish for. I will grant you 4 or 5 cities. I can't remember how many it was in the story, but I'll grant you a certain amount of cities because he's a Brahmin, right? And so the son said, oh, okay, please bring my mother back to life. That's the first thing, make her as she was before. Secondly, make it so that whenever I shoot an arrow, it doesn't hit people, or if it doesn't kill them. Something funny like that. And then thirdly, give me the power to kill all nobility, to kill everyone of the royal class, and maybe 1 or 2 other wishes. And so the Brahmin bestowed these boons, these cities, upon the son. And the mother indeed came back to life. And the son then waged war on the king's clan and indeed on all those of royal class, and completely destroyed them to such an extent that the royal class were almost obliterated from the surface of the earth. So these deeds are praised by Hindu followers. They're regarded as something extraordinary, something holy and wonderful. But of course, from the perspective of the Buddha Dhamma, then these are not praiseworthy at all. These are abhorrent deeds, harmful, negative, and sinful deeds.
this son, Parashurama, he killed beings, he harmed beings, he killed the king and his clan. He even killed his own mother, which was one of the 5 deeds with immediate karmic retribution. So Buddha abhorred violence, right? And he prohibited violence. Violence and harming others is not the spiritual path. That is not the Dharma. Violence is negative karma. So this is the difference between Buddha's teaching and the teachings of others. One praises violence and one prohibits it. Sorry, there was just a clarification about the wish, one of the wishes of Parashurama. So it was not that whoever he shot an arrow at would not die, but rather whoever he shot an arrow at would die. Okay, so now let's dedicate the merits, take a break, and then we will resume the teaching.
Sonamdi tamje ziba nye tamne nyebe danam bangje jengega naje balon tuk tibbe sole ndoa trolvare sho